Hello. Welcome to Structured Dynamics' Open Semantic Framework Academy. Today's tutorial number 7 is on configuring and using OSF entities. Today's host and your demo jockey is Fred Giasson.
Hi, in this screencast we'll cover how to configure and use the OSF Entities module. So let's step back one step and let's remember what's the purpose of OSF for Drupal. So OSF for Drupal is meant to be the bridge between Drupal and OSF web service endpoints. So the goal is really to change the backend of Drupal to interact with a web service framework instead of interacting directly with a database system such as MySQL or Postgres. This being said, what we need is to have a series of modules that will make that bridge between the core Drupal concepts and the OSF web service endpoints. And the OSF entity is one of these core connector modules. So the purpose of OSF entities is to map the concept that exists in OSF web services into a Drupal portal. So what we want here is to map the core concepts of Drupal to the OSF web services. So we want the users and the developers and the teamers to just access the normal Drupal API. But instead of manipulating information in MySQL, it would manipulate information in the OSF web services. For doing this, what we did is basically to create a new resource, a new type of entity in Drupal, which is called resource type. Then this resource type will have multiple bundles and fields that will be created for that new resource type. So this is what OSF Entities does. So it does map these core Drupal concepts to the classes and properties in the OSF datasets. So for example, a class in OSF will become a bundle in Drupal, and a property that describes that class will be translated as a field in Drupal. So that's a mapping that we are doing with the OSF Entities module. Once the mapping will be done, then we'll just manipulate the information using the entity API, just like we would do with any other Drupal entities. So the developers, the teamer, won't know anything about OSF web services. However, all information that will be modified in Drupal will be modified, in fact, in OSF web services. So by using the entity load, entity create, entity save, core Drupal API, all information will be saved in OSF web services instead of being saved into Drupal. So that's what we will see in this screencast. So let's go back to our website. So to access these settings, we have to go to the configuration option, and then we have to click configure OSF for Drupal modules. And then we have to search for the Entities Connector tab. So these are the core properties or the core settings for the OSF Entities module. So the first thing when we create a new OSF for Drupal portal is to map or to expose the entities that exist in OSF and to expose them into Drupal, just like what I just described. The first thing we probably have to do is to select the ontologies. So these ontologies are basically all the loaded ontologies that I have on my system. Then what I want to do is to expose all of them or some of them directly into the exposition or the mapping process of OSF entity. Normally, you probably just want to use all of them. Sometimes some of them may be too big or may not be related to any mapping exercise. In this case, you may want to unselect them, but the rule of thumb is just select everything. So now what we will do is to enter into it in a two-step process. So this two-step process will be to map the classes that are currently being used into my OSF instance into Drupal bundles. And then for each of these bundles that I want to create in Drupal, I will associate a series of properties to them that will become fields into Drupal. So to start this configuration process, I have to click the Expose Entities button. So what I get there are basically two sections. So in the first top section called the Select Use Classes. So these are all the classes that are currently being used in OSF web services to describe different kind of things. So a class is nothing else than a type. So a class, a type, a kind of things. And after that, there are use cases when you want to create a bundle for a class that is not yet existing. So for example, let's say that, so right now I have schools into my dataset. However, let's say that I want to add information about hospitals. However, right now there is no one record in OSF that describes an hospital. However, I want to create hospitals from Drupal, using the Drupal interface. So what I would do is just to look for an hospital class that I have in one of my ontology, such that I can create a bundle for that class. But let's say I also want to create a bundle for schools, and the schools are existing in OSF in my schools dataset, so that's why they are appearing in that section. So next, so when I click on the next select properties, so what I do, or what the system does right now, is to create a bundle for each of the selected things that I selected. So it will create a bundle for hospitals, it will create a bundle for schools, and everything else that was checked. And by the way, there were gray checks, so everything that is in gray is just because these are core concepts in OSF or Drupal that you cannot uncreate or remove. So these are all the bundles that got created from the previous step. The two ones that interest us are basically the schools bundle and the hospitals bundle. So if I click the schools bundle, so what I'm doing there is to specify all the fields that I want to create in my schools bundle. Again, I have two sections. I have a section of used properties and I have a section of unused properties. So the goal of these two sections is exactly the same as the goal that I had when I was doing the mapping of the classes. So all these properties, so all these used properties are basically all the properties that are currently being used to describe my schools into my schools dataset. It is possible that you don't want to expose all these properties to Drupal. Whatever you choose to do, if it's to expose all of them or just a few of them, the information in OSF won't appear or disappear with this process. This process is really just about exposing the fields you want your users to modify or to add information to. In my case, I just want everything. And also for the select unused properties section. So there are use cases when you create a new property that you want to start filling in with Drupal. There is no information about that property in OSF at the moment. So that's where you will start to add new properties as required. So all these properties that you are searching for in the auto-completion text box are basically coming from the loaded ontologies of your instance, and they have to be checked in the select ontologies section that we just saw previously. So if the ontology is not checked in that section, then the results won't appear there. For now, I don't want any unselect properties. And let's say that hospital. So right now I don't have any hospital existing in OSF. So that means that we don't have any used properties for hospital. However, right now I don't want to do anything special about the hospitals. So I will just leave it as is. The only thing we'll be able to define right now for the hospitals are the description and their preferred labels for the hospitals. In the future, if I want to add new properties to hospitals, I can always redo the mapping process, so the two-step process of the mapping of classes and properties into bundles and fields to create a new field. That's how it works for OSF entities. Because of the way we are mapping content of the data sets into Drupal. However, this process is completely different for the other connector module, which is called OSF Field Storage. But this will be the topic of the next screencast. So now that we selected everything we wanted, the only thing we have to do is to click the Expose button. So what the Expose button does is to take all the properties we selected in that step and to create field types for each of them, and then create field instances for each of the bundles we selected. So you see we have a few things there. So we have warnings. They appear as errors just to make sure that you are aware of them, but they are not real errors. They are warnings. So what it's telling you is that this property, this other property, and this other property are currently being used to describe information in OSF. So they are properties that are used, but they are not currently defined in any ontologies currently loaded into the portal. So that's not a problem. This is really just a warning to tell you, hey, you are using these properties, but we don't have any information about the meaning of these properties. So please in the future, just try to add a new ontology where these properties are defined, or just do define these properties by end. So you could create a new property in one of the loaded ontologies by clicking that link that would redirect you to a form that would let you create that property, and you would be able to save the location of that new property that you are creating. And then the next time that you would do this two-step process, classes, properties mapping, then you won't see this warning message anymore. So that's it. We now have all the bundles, fields, and field instances created in Drupal for the content that we wanted to expose that is currently hosted in OSF, in the OSF web services. So all these are bundles of entity type, resource type. As you can see, there is an ignore there. So what ignore means is basically that yes, we did synchronize them. However, they won't appear anywhere in the user interfaces. So when will come the time to create new content with these bundles, so these things won't appear in the list of things that you can create. So for example, what I mean by that is if we go to resources, if we go to add resource, so the only resources that are appearing there are the ones that are not ignored, so educational institutions and hospitals. So if you want to toggle ignore on ignore bundle, the only thing you have to do is to exit the bundle and to check and uncheck that checkbox. So now what we can do. So let's focus on the schools bundle. So what I want to do is to manage the fields. So these are all the fields that got created from the my synchronization process. So we have the district of the school, we have the latitude, longitude, what it relates to, description, and pref label. So what I can do there is to reorder these things such that when we'll generate the form to exit the entities of that bundle, such that the fields get ordered in that order. So then we'll click save. So the new order is now defined. So let's talk a little bit about the properties in OSF. So basically in RDF, because all information in OSF is in RDF. In RDF you have three kinds of properties, but I will just focus on two of them that do have an impact on OSF entities. So there are data type properties and there are object properties. So basically a data type property is just a property for which its value is some kind of literals. So it can be a string, could be an integer, a boolean, it could be an address, it could be anything that is basically literal. And after that, you have the object properties. And the object properties are a special kind of properties that relate an entity to another entity. That's it. So when we do the synchronization, all the properties get mapped as field type. And each field type has a field widget. So by default, a data type property will have a text field widget. And all the object properties will have an OSF Entity Reference field widget. What we'll see in a subsequent screencast is to know how to define specific field type and field widget for the data type properties. So for example, if you would like to have the geolatitude module for the latitude and longitude fields, or if you would like to have a date picker for a date field, and so on and so on. So that's what we'll see in the subsequent screencast. For now, we'll just focus on what we got there. So text fields and the OSF Entity Reference. So what we can do, for example, is if we check the relates to. So relates to relate a school to another entity using the OSF Entity widget. I can define more information about this field. So I can change the label, for example, so the label that will appear in Drupal. I can change the help text. So right now the label and the help text are basically coming from the definition of the ontologies, but I will talk more about that in the subsequent screencast as well. So because this is the OSF Entity Reference widget, what we can do is to say, oh, I just want to be able to reference entities that belongs to one of these dataset, or to an entity that belongs to one of these ontologies dataset. So in this case, what we want is to reference things in the Muni ontology. Then we can say, oh, we just want to be able to reference one thing, or we want to be able to reference multiple things. So that's where the number of values is interesting. Now I will just save the settings. So now I'm fully set up. I did edit all the fields that I wanted to edit and so on. So now let's see the impact of all the configuration that we did so far with OSF entities. So to check that, what we will do is just to search and browse for the resources that exist in the schools dataset. So these are all the schools that are currently defined in the schools dataset. So what I want to do is just to edit one of them. So let's pick up the first one. So I click the edit operation, and then I get to that form. So that form is basically the form that I just configured in a mapping process and then in a structure configuration. So because we are not using or specifying any specific field type or field widget for these properties, everything is using the text field widget. So the latitude is there, the longitude is there, and that's it. However, as I said, in a subsequent screencast, we will be able to define specific field widgets that will make this form even much better. So let's just for now focus on relates to. So relates to is the OSF Entity Reference widget. So we can reference, for example, this school to related to a concept, for example, because people are doing acrobatics in this school, for example. It can be, we can really relate to anything. And after that, let's say that they have adaptive equipment. So let's say they are social clubs then. So every time it's like something, it just adds there. So this is a reference between my school and these concepts in my ontology. I can continue to add them, and when I'm done, I just have to save that resource. So I would talk about all these things in a subsequent screencast. So I will talk about all these widgets. I will talk about the revisioning capabilities, the translation capabilities, how to delete, export, and everything. So that's it. That's how we do configure OSF entities. So OSF entities is really a connector module that connects the Drupal core API to the OSF web services. So to all the information that exists in the OSF web services and all information that you only have access to. Thank you for listening.